Oh my God, that's so smart.
It
Yeah.
was so smart.
No, you're smart for calling that out, and the book is
The
smart.
book
But
is
yeah,
smart.
both are smart. Welcome to Book Talk Etc., a podcast bound to grow your TBR. I'm Tina from TBR Etc.
And I'm Hannah from Handpicked Books.
And this is a conversational podcast about books and more from two Midwest mood readers who are easily distracted by new releases. And today, we're discussing climate fiction.
If you enjoy listening, we'd love for you to follow us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. And if you have a quick minute, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing us on social media. It truly helps us connect with other book lovers.
Hey, Hannah.
Hey, Tina. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I am doing good. I'm enjoying this early recording time.
I know it's 9 a.m. where I am, and I love it because I'm a morning girl. Listen, I always tell my people I work with or students I'm talking to or whomever, after 4 p.m., my brain is mashed potatoes. I'm like, that's it. I've said all the things I can say today. So
yeah, I'm a morning person too.
Yeah. We should just get up early every day or every time we record and just hop in. Breakfast.
Now.
Breakfast with Tina. Oh my gosh. We were just connecting over our mutual disdain for bugs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's separate problems we have in our area. So that was a fun little warm up. We've got the cicadas and the flies, and Hannah's got the
ticks and caterpillars.
Ticks and caterpillars. I mean, really. So it's like, hey, we like summer in theory. I like it from the safety of my home. Like I like to look outside.
Mm-hmm. So pretty, so green.
So green, so much foliage. But yes, I'm not. We know I'm an indoor cat, but anyway. So
that's why we read.
That's why we read. And that's why I think I partially really like climate fiction. I really like wilderness writing because I'm like, look, I'm not going to be out there, but I like to read about it. I'm interested in that.
Yep. From a distance.
From a distance, exactly. Let's hop in. I have a lot to say about climate fiction, and I know you had a interesting reading week as we prepped for this episode. So I'm definitely curious to see where everything shook out. My loving lately has nothing to do with climate fiction or bugs, but it is something that I've really, really been enjoying. I've said this on the podcast before. I've wanted to get into wearing daily jewelry. Now, as I say this, I'm showing Hannah my bare hands. I've got nothing on. But I did find a company that I really love. They're called Boho Magic. Now, I'm particular about my jewelry. I have very big hands. My ring size is not small, and a lot of companies just simply do not carry my size. And I think Boho Magic's found me somehow on social media, or I found them. And I'm very glad I ordered. Now, I got 2 rings. I think they had some sort of sale going on when I got them, so I bought both. And I love them. I will take a picture of them and share it to Instagram when this episode releases so you guys can see what I bought. I'm not going to describe it, but I've had them for about a month. And my number one thing that I cannot tolerate, of course, when wearing jewelry is if it turns me green. Nobody wants that. Obviously, you don't want that. So these are not fine jewelry, but it's also real jewelry that doesn't, affect my skin in any way. And they were not that expensive. I think it was under $100 for 2 rings. Boho Magic has beautiful stuff. They are a vegan, cruelty-free business and everything is handmade. And my next purchase from them is definitely going to be a fidget ring. Do you know what a fidget ring is?
Yeah, I've always wanted one.
I do too. And so it's basically a ring. And I'm showing you what I would be doing if I had it. A fidget ring has small moving parts that can be manipulated to provide a physical outlet for fidgeting. John's laughing probably as he's editing this, thinking, do not wear a fidget ring while you record. Because the whole time I would be like,
yes.
So I bought their rings. They also have necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and stuff for men. So I thought I would share in case anybody else is on the hunt for everyday boho style jewelry. I am a fan. It is a jewelry company called Boho Magic.
That is a really good one. It's nice to find jewelry companies that you really like and trust.
Yes. Yeah. And I never think to splurge on this. I don't know what made me go for it, but I'm I think probably in the back of my head, I'm well, if I like it, it's a loving lately.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my loving lately is also something that I haven't splurged on in a really long time, like since college. I have had the same hair straightener for years and years.
Yeah.
And I finally splurged on a new one and I love it. It's the Lange Hair Duo and it's their 360 Airflow Styler, which is a 2-in-1 curling wand and a titanium flat iron hair. I know a lot of beauty experts, which is not me, are very particular about what kind of hair straightener it is. So if you are curious, it's a titanium hair straightener. But this one is really cool because it doesn't get too hot on the outside because it has that airflow. So it literally blows cool air from the outside of it. So it cools your hair as it's straightening it. And it also doesn't,
awesome.
Yeah, and it doesn't get too hot on the outside. I have very curly hair and it's also just very like, I have a lot of cowlicks and things that are very hard to straighten out. And so I've needed a really nice straightener for a long time, but so many of the really nice ones are really expensive.
Yeah.
And this one is such a good balance of fairly affordable and also does a really nice job on my very fussy hair. So if you go to their site, I think it lists around 89, but they always have a sale going. And if you wait for a sale, I got mine for close to 60. So, which is a great price for a really nice hair straightener. This has really good reviews on Amazon. And also I've had a lot of friends that have used this. That's how I got my recommendation is from friends who have used it and it's done a really nice job. And so yeah, it's got great reviews. I'm loving it. And that is the Lange hair straightener, the Airflow Styler.
Did you use it today or recently?
This is from 2 days ago.
Nice. It looks good.
Yeah.
I noticed immediately when you logged on. I'm like, oh, your hair's straight today.
Yes, long and straight.
Love that. Okay, good pick. I don't straighten my hair. I have a Dyson Airwrap, which Jonathan bought for me, I think 6 years ago. It must have been like one of the first Airwraps. I don't know how he discovered it, but anyway, that's what I use. But I too have a straightener from 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So maybe it's time to invest at some point.
Yeah. I really, really have been liking this one.
You've been loving it lately?
I've been
over there?
I've been loving it lately. Yeah. Sorry, my toddler is literally banging 2 pans together.
That is so stereotypical.
Yeah.
So
literally great. Outside my door, just banging ding, 2 pans together. Ding. Could not be a worse thing to happen.
My latest read is one that has been getting a lot of early buzz. It is a book that just came out last week, and it is Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. I loved her book, The Knockout Queen, and I was very excited to read this one. I had it on my extended summer bonanza list that we released to our patrons, and this is about Margot. She is the child of a Hooters waitress and an ex-pro wrestler, and she's always known that she does not have a safety net, and she is going to have to make it on her own. She has enrolled at her local junior college, even though she doesn't really see the point and doesn't have any aspirations as to what she wants to do to make a living. She just figured she would enroll. She loves writing, though, and she's still figuring things out and gets involved with her English professor, who is married, and we don't like him. The affair is brief, but isn't brief enough to keep her from getting pregnant. Despite everyone's advice, she decides to keep the baby, mostly out of naivete and a yearning for something bigger. Now at 20, Margot is alone with an infant. She's unemployed and on the verge of eviction. She needs cash fast, and then her estranged father, Jinx, shows up on her doorstep and asks to move in with her. And she agrees in exchange for help with childcare. Now, Jinx is an ex-pro wrestler, and, he was very involved in that world. He has his own issues going on. Margot's still trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to make money? So she decides to start an OnlyFans as an experiment, and soon finds herself adapting some of Jinx's advice from the world of wrestling, like how to craft a compelling character and how to make your audience fall in love with you. And before she knows it, she's turned it into a runaway success. Could this be the answer to all her problems, or does internet fame come with too high of a price? I'm very happy to report that I too loved this. I loved this book. Margot is so charming, and I couldn't help but root for her. It's funny, but deals with some serious issues, including debt, single motherhood, legal battles, infidelity, and addiction. But despite this, it wasn't overly heavy. I could see that the author did her research into the world of OnlyFans and wrestling and shared those stories with care. Margot is a very real and flawed character, and she reads as though she's 20, but also you get to see her progress from this college student who's making bad decisions into a mother who is fighting for the best for her child. I loved this book. Everyone had an opinion about what Margot should do, what Margot shouldn't do, yet few people seemed interested in helping her out. It's one of those books where I was reading it and I found myself thinking of the characters when I wasn't reading. Always a good sign for me. I found out this has already been adapted for television as a series for Apple TV and a fun tie-in. It will star Elle Fanning, and she also reads the audiobook. So I got a sneak preview to see what Margot will really sound like on the show. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. Highly recommend. I think it's great for summer and just great in general. That book is Margot's Got Money Troubles by Ruthie Thorpe.
That sounds really good. I didn't realize that there was a pregnancy tie-in. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's her whole onus for wanting to get cash fast and figure things out. And she also shares some very real conundrums, like how do you be as a single mother with no child support, how do you work? Like if you don't have anybody there to care for your child, like what are you truly supposed to do if not work somehow from inside the house? So
that's terrifying.
I know. I was rooting for her.
Oh man. And I think to your point too, it's a great sign when you're thinking about the characters when you're not reading it.
Yes.
That to me is that's indicative of a 5-star for sure. And I felt the same way about my latest read.
Ooh.
Which was Last House by Jessica Shattuck. And this is a pretty new release. I feel like it's gotten some buzz online. The reviews on Goodreads are a little spotty. And I think that I know why. I think that it's been a little bit mismarketed. I think it's been marketed mostly as historical fiction, but I think that it's definitely more literary historical fiction. So it's set in the 50s. America's booming, and Nick, a World War II vet turned oil company lawyer, is living the dream. He's got a beautiful family, a cushy suburban life, and a secret mountain getaway called Last House. Fast forward to the 60s, and things are a lot messier as we switch to Nick's daughter's point of view, Catherine, while she's grappling with idealism and rebellion, and the family is forced to confront this dark side of their oil-fueled fortune. This is a multi-generational family saga. It spans decades and asks really big questions about family, legacy, and ultimately the cost of progress. So, as I mentioned before, this is definitely, in my opinion, literary historical fiction. Although I think maybe more highbrow readers might not agree with that literary element. I don't always know. But really, what I mean is that the book is slow, sprawling, layered, and very, very character driven. It took me a while to even remember that we had a plot that we were circling around, and we do. We definitely do. And we end up getting back to the plot or the point by the end of the novel, which I thought was done really brilliantly. But you've got to love family sagas and character driven books to get to that end goal and enjoy the overall process. It's definitely an unusual novel, too, in that it is not only a book told from multiple characters through multiple timelines, but we also change the perspective throughout the novel. So the whole first part is told in third person from the mother and father's point of view. And then we switch to their daughter, Catherine's point of view, and it's all first person. So I really liked that, but I could see that being an issue for some readers. So I think it's worth pointing out. Also, this book is very political. There is a deep level of geopolitics from the 50s and 70s. There's a lot of social politics and a really interesting dichotomy between the parents and the daughter, Catherine, when we switch to her point of view because of all of her raging against a lot of what her father stands for and with through his career, but they also love each other very much. And that was a really complicated and I thought well done dynamic as a family story. And then there's the couple's son, Harry, who is a quiet character, but he has this through line throughout the narrative, and you don't really know what his role is going to play, but you feel like you're on the precipice of something with his character the whole book as you keep reading. If you couldn't tell, I really loved this one. I think that if you love multi-generational family sagas with a really robust historical setting and plot, then you will really love this. The writing was beautiful. I ended up annotating this one because I loved so many passages and conversations between the characters. This was a 5-star read for me, and that was Last House by Jessica Shettick.
Oh my gosh, you did such a good job. That one is on my list. And when you said you kind of forgot there was a plot, that's sort of my catnip. I'm like, yeah, I like that. I'm like, yes, that's okay. That means it's very character driven and you're still interested.
Yes.
You know, even though there's not maybe on the surface a ton going on.
Yeah. And almost by the end, I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we were getting to this.
Yeah, I remember that. Okay.
I remember. Oh, yeah, this was kind of the whole point. So,
yeah, no, I love that. That sounds like it's definitely up my alley. That book sort of sounded like it might span a little bit of genre. It's a little bit historical fiction, maybe a little bit literary. And our topic today is climate fiction, which also spans a lot of genre. And I think there's almost sort of a difficulty in defining what climate fiction is. So we thought it could be fun to define it and talk about why we like it and share some recommendations. So first, let's talk about what is climate fiction. And I did a little research on this. Climate fiction books are typically provocative novels in which the enemy is climate change. And I never considered that, but I saw it written somewhere and I thought, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly part of what I love about this genre. And I found that the term Cli-Fi was credited to a blogger named Dan Bloom, who runs a website called Cli-Fi.net, which we can link to. And the goal really of naming Cli-Fi was to draw attention to an emerging body of fiction dealing with critical environmental issues facing our planet. And he says he selected the term because it has a nice rhyming sound and it's a play on sci-fi, and it was short enough to easily fit into headlines. Other people say it's unnecessary because climate fiction already includes appropriate subgenres like science fiction, speculative fiction, or eco-fiction. For me, I'm a girl that likes subgenres. I like nuance, so I think Cli-Fi is perfectly appropriate.
Yeah, I like subgenres too, and I think that it isn't much different than having books that are really tropey or it just helps you kind of narrow down what you like as a reader too, if there are certain things that you really tend to enjoy. Part of why you and I chose to do this episode is because we both tend to really enjoy books like this that are eco-fiction, climate fiction, whatever you want to call it, but kind of more of a niche subgenre in the post-apocalyptic and dystopian, but also literary fiction and sometimes sci-fi genres.
Yes.
And it's like, well, I don't necessarily like all of sci-fi or all of horror or all, but I do tend to like ones that lean into climate fiction. And so I think that these subcategories are really fun and I really enjoy them. I did a little bit of research as well. My definition was really similar. I really liked the definition where the enemy, the villain, is climate. I think that that's a really perfect and condensed way of describing it. But what I came up with is that climate fiction, also known as Cli-Fi, is a genre of literature that explores the impacts of climate change. Stories can be set in the present day, the near future, or even in distant futures, but they all feature a significantly altered climate as a central theme. So to me, I think climate fiction draws inspiration from real world climate science, but it can also incorporate elements of science fiction, fantasy, dystopian fiction, etc. I think all, circling back to the point that it can encompass a wide variety of genres.
No, exactly. And it's so because you're listing all of these different subgenres and it's like, yeah, it's all those things, right?
Yeah.
But I guess the climate is the key element. And I actually, when I was reading one of my picks for today, I thought, oh my God, is this a climate fiction book? And then I had to walk back and think, yes, because it also is other things, but it still centralizes, I guess the kicking off point was climate fiction. And so I found this 5-point definition. What sets climate fiction apart from other genres? Here are the main elements. 1, climate change is a central theme. 2, the focus is planet Earth. 3, the story makes environmental science more approachable. 4, the effects of climate change are described in personal terms. And 5, it represents a bridge between science, the humanities, and advocacy. When I saw that, I thought, ding, ding, ding. This is why I love this genre, because it is often all of these things. It's often more literary. A lot of times it's centered on human psychology. And that, I think, is one of the aspects that I love the most. I like the science of it. And I like that in theory, in real life, we are still in the position now to be able to save the planet. I like that there's big stakes. And I like that the stories are very emotional and very personal. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, thank you for articulating in this definition why I tend to love this genre. How was the reading experience for you?
This one was tricky because I've read a lot in this genre that I've absolutely loved. I can think of one right now that I know you and I both love, which is Migrations, which, has been talked about on the podcast a lot because it's amazing. But I had a hard time picking books because I was really trying to branch out and pick books that I hadn't heard talked about a lot, or that I wanted to do research and find books for this episode. And I tried a lot and did not make it through a lot of them. I did finally land on a couple. One I loved, and then one that I thought was okay. But I think that makes sense with my approach in wanting to experiment a little bit and kind of think outside the box and maybe read ones that I hadn't necessarily heard of. So I feel like I learned a lot from this episode, and now I feel like I have a better idea of what I like and don't like. So I will say that although this episode is one that really challenged my reading, it also, I think, really helped me kind of learn what I like and don't like.
I think that's so smart. And this is new to you. I think this is one of the first episodes we've done, maybe the first, where it was a very specific subgenre we wanted to read for. And so you found yourself trying to say, okay, let me find books that meet this. And I often do the same where I'm like, okay, let me find something. Let me do research. Let me find something that maybe we're not seeing everywhere. And I often have that same experience where I'm like, I can't land on anything. And that's sort of frustrating. So I'm glad that you got there in the end. But sorry, it took a little bit of time.
It's okay. Well, speaking of getting there in the end, my first book is called The End We Start From.
There you go.
By Megan Hunter. And this is a book. It's very, very small. It's under 150 pages. And it's set in a dystopian universe in which London has experienced an environmental disaster that has forced its inhabitants out of their homes and into the north, where refugee camps have become one of the only ways that one can survive. Our unnamed main character has just given birth to her first child, Z, at the start of this novel, the brink of London's mysterious disaster. You follow her as she travels with her newborn from shelter to shelter, discovering motherhood even through life's unexpected toils. As they move from place to place, Z learns to grasp life, seemingly content against everything that they're going through. This is ultimately the story of a mother. This is definitely a motherhood story of a woman desperately clinging to the hope of this new life in a completely broken and terrifying world. I have really been enjoying dipping into more experimental literature like this lately, and I'm really happy that I decided to bring this one, being only 150 or so pages and written in really fragmented prose. This was a quick read and perfect, in my opinion, if you are new to more experimental fiction like this. The writing itself was really lovely. It was very sparse, bordering on frustrating at times, but yet it was really well stylized and almost poetic. and I really liked it in this instance. I really loved how the narrative's sparseness mirrored the protagonist's shrinking world. I felt like it really reflected her focus solely on the essentials, which was her child and their survival. The author's choice to designate characters with only initials, I felt lent to a universal reading experience to what could have been more individualized. And to me, this was a really poignant and thoughtful touch. Plot definitely takes a backseat in this one, and instead we follow a mother's journey as she navigates a world in ruins, encountering and losing people along the way. This is not your typical action-packed dystopian adventure. It's definitely a more meditative exploration of motherhood, loss, and the possibility of a new beginning amidst disaster. I really loved this one and think that it's definitely worth giving a shot. And that is The End We Start From by Megan Hunter.
Oh, good one. I'm glad you found that. And I find often that a lot of the Cli-Fi books, at least the ones that jump out to me, are motherhood books as well.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. I loved After the Flood. Did you read that one?
I did not read that one, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not remembering the author's name, but I read that a few years ago, and that was one of my favorite climate fiction books, and that was also a motherhood story as well.
That one is by Cassandra Montag.
Yes.
In my head, I knew exactly what the cover looked like. It's blue and pink and sort of swirly. Yes, I knew exactly what you meant. But yeah, and it's funny because I have a motherhood book later on today. And actually, you could argue that this next one, the first one that I'm bringing, is a parenthood book as well. My first book is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This was very popular. It was a Goodreads Choice Award nominee for Best Science Fiction and a nominee for Best Debut Novel, both in 2022. The book opens with Dr. Cliff Miyashiro arriving in the Arctic Circle to continue his recently deceased daughter's research. While he's there, they discover a virus newly unearthed from melting permafrost. So it's this eons dormant plague basically gets unearthed, and it reshapes life on Earth for generations. Yet, even while struggling to counter this destructive force, humanity stubbornly persists in myriad moving and ever inventive ways. Among those adjusting to this new normal are an inspiring comedian employed by a theme park designed for terminally ill children, who falls in love with a mother trying desperately to keep her son alive. You have a scientist who, having failed to save his own son from the plague, gets a second chance at fatherhood when one of his test subjects, a pig, develops human speech, and a man who, recovering from his own coma, plans a block party for his neighbors who have also woken up to find that they alone have survived their families. This book sounds like it's completely bonkers, and it is, but it's also much more than that. It is desperately sad. I found myself having to stop reading it at times because it was so bleak through most of it. It's not a typical novel, and I did not know this going in. It's not, there's not the beginning, middle, end. I really liked the first story, and you'll see those characters come through again, but it's not just about them. It's very expansive. It reads more like a short story collection. And I liked a lot of these stories and a lot of these points of view. Surprisingly, the story with the talking pig was my favorite. This man had me out here literally crying over a talking pig. I'm like, what is happening? But like a lot of short story collections, I thought some were more interesting and stronger than others. And I did find myself wandering toward the middle. I like, though, that we followed this cast of intricately linked characters and that the story spans hundreds of years as humanity tries to restore the delicate balance of the world. I read in one of the synopses that this is wonderful, dreamlike, and a little too possible. And that definitely resonated with me. The audio is excellent. It is a full cast narration. So if you like audiobooks, I think this is well done. Overall, I liked it. I didn't love it. I'm glad I read it, and I rated it about 4 stars. This book was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu.
So I've heard this book described both as short stories and a novel. And it sounds like it's not really either.
It's not really either. I don't know how to describe it because it's not. I think calling it a short story collection is almost a disservice because they're interconnected short stories, if you will.
Right, they're too interconnected for it to be totally separate.
Yes, because if you go in thinking, okay, they're short stories, you're going to miss the nuance, because I didn't recognize what was going on at first. And I'm like reading, and I'm like, wait a minute, is that the daughter of this guy from the beginning? Oh my God. Like I was like putting the dots together.
Yeah.
I should say that it's not completely bleak throughout. There are elements of hope and there's elements of joy, but especially the theme park, because at the beginning the virus attacked kids, that was almost too much to bear.
Oh.
Keep in mind, I have 2 young kids,
Yeah.
so it's obviously very close to home, but
it's hard not to think of your own kids in those situations.
Exactly. Yeah. He did it in a very respectful way. I mean, the author did a great job. It just was very bleak. So take care if you decide to read this.
Yeah, that's a great note. I am definitely really curious about this one, and you did a really good job talking about it.
Thank you. I feel like you would enjoy it.
I think I would too.
I also want to go back and annotate. The cover is stunning. It might be my all-time favorite book cover. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, it is really pretty. It's really unique, but in a very simple way.
Yes. You're the one that knows. You're the marketer, so I'm glad that you agree. I just go, I like it.
Okay. So my next book is not as successful as my first. This is definitely a book that fell prey to me trying to find and research books that sounded like climate fiction that I felt fell really well into this category. And although this one does a little bit, it definitely didn't lean into those climate elements as much as I wanted it to. So this one is Plastic by Scott Guild. This is a new release. It came out in February. It has a really cool cover. It's got these really fun bubblegum pink bubble letters across the front. It almost looks like Barbie-esque, but it's against a black backdrop. It's just a really stunning cover. And that's actually initially what drew me to it. And then when I read about it, I was like, this sounds like it might be perfect. So Plastic felt very much like Barbie meets Black Mirror meets Ready Player One. Our protagonist, Erin, works selling VR tech to fellow figurines, think living dolls. But a workplace attack leaves her shaken, and we find out why throughout the novel as we learn more about her backstory. Enter Jacob, a figurine that she ends up really connecting with. Together, they explore the world of VR, which ends up being their escape from a world of war and eco-terror. But Erin has family secrets threatening to shatter her carefully built reality, and her PTSD from events of her past slowly start to uncover how we are affected by and how we heal from our trauma. This book begs the question, is love possible in a broken world? I would say that this book was definitely an imaginative story, and I did appreciate the intersection of technology, politics, and human connection in this really unique dystopian world in the face of environmental and societal collapse. I also really appreciated the book's satirical approach to the dissection of the American collapse in our own pre-apocalypse. I put that in quotes because I think from the reviews that I saw, a lot of people were like, ooh, this seems like a little too close, which I think many of us are feeling when we read a lot of these climate fiction books. The biggest issue with this one for me was the dialogue of the characters, which was so difficult to read. The characters spoke in a stilted and more simplistic speech that was, I believe, a very intentional nod to the shallowness of American society. On top of this already jarring dialogue, proper punctuation wasn't used and quotation marks were not used either. I totally understand that this is a really bold stylistic choice, but for me, it didn't pay off. The speech patterns really took me out of the story as I tried to make sure I was accurately deciphering what the characters meant, and it ultimately made this book feel like work, but not the kind of work that pays off for a really powerful story. It was the kind of work that eventually makes you forget what the point of the story was anyway. I tried listening to the audio, and this didn't really help much, but I will say that I did far prefer the audio to the text, and I ended up being pretty glad that I read this by the end of the audiobook listening experience, just for what a unique story this was. Looking at this from a more neutral and objective lens, I think that this was a really clever look into the hollow core of American society. And while I wasn't always fully on board with the way the author approached the book stylistically, I can appreciate that this was funny and smart and at least a fresh addition to the genre, if not only for the fact that I have never read a book quite like this. in a more saturated genre at the moment. And that was Plastic by Scott Guild.
Okay. I can picture the cover. I can also picture you. I have this vision of you reading it last night, the night before recording, and like griping to your husband, like, I don't understand. Why would they do it? Like, da 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 da.
I
Just
showed
not
him.
enjoying it.
I showed him pages. I
I had a feeling.
I was like, can you read this? And he was
Yeah.
like, I could not read that. And I
I
was
don't know
like,
what that's saying. Yes. Oh,
so
well, bless you. I'm glad you brought it though. And you're right. Sometimes there's something to be said for books that are unique. They're bringing something different.
yes.
But also sometimes I just want to read a version of what I've read previously that's very
Yes.
accessible and like
Fair.
enjoyable. Like, okay. Well, I'm going to wrap us up with this segment with a 5+ star read. It's The Light
Yay.
Pirate by Lily Brooks Dalton. And so last week we were talking about a book that I did not love. It was my latest read, The Nature of Disappearing. And I said, one of my issues could be that I was coming fresh off of a 5+ star read. And it was this book. I had some folks reach out and say, what book were you talking about? But I didn't want to spoil it. So it is The Light Pirate. This was a Goodreads Choice Award nominee for Best Science Fiction in 2023. And funny story. So I initially DNF'd this and I couldn't imagine why. So I'm like, this book is so gorgeous. Like, what was it that gave me pause? So I looked back at my notes and Storygraph and I had a little thing, probably good, but not for me right now. And then I looked at the date that I DNF'd it. And it was exactly when we were packing up our old house and moving into this house, which makes a ton of sense. That was probably one of the more stressful times in our life ever. So at the time, I needed something easy breezy, and this is not easy breezy, but it is so worth it. It is set in the near future, and it's a hopeful story of survival and resilience that follows Wanda, a luminous child born out of a devastating hurricane. It's set in Florida, and Florida is slipping away as devastating weather patterns and rising sea levels wreak gradual havoc on the state's infrastructure. A powerful hurricane approaches a small town on the southeastern coast. It centers on Kirby, who's an electrical line worker, his pregnant wife, Frida, and their two sons, Flip and Lucas. And in the beginning, the book opens up with them preparing for the worst. Then the boys go missing just before the hurricane hits. And Kirby is like, okay, he's debating. He doesn't want to leave his wife, but he's got to find these kids. So he heads out to find the children. And Frida is left alone and goes into premature labor and gives birth to an unusual child named Wanda. She names Wanda after the hurricane, which was a very interesting choice. As Florida continues to unravel, Wanda grows, moving from childhood to adulthood, adapting not only to the changing landscape, but also to the people who stayed behind in a place abandoned by civilization. Wanda loses family, gains community, and ultimately seeks adventure, love, and purpose in a place remade by nature. Let me say, they call her a luminous child. And I thought, is there magical realism in here? Is it going to get funky? And there are elements that are a little bit unexplainable. However, one of the main characters that you meet later on is a scientist who's been prepping for this pandemic or whatever for her whole life. And so she brings in a science twist, which I love. I hate when there's something just dropped in that's magical with no context or it just seems easy. So don't worry if that gave you pause. This book is fantastic. It is intricate, it's detailed, and one you should pay attention to, but it's also beautiful. Some parts are super fast paced and suspenseful, and others are more quiet and lyrical, but everything comes together to make Wanda a character I'll never forget. And if you like nature writing, definitely get this on your list because the writing is gorgeous. That's how I prefer my nature, is from the page. I think this is a good choice for those that like to follow characters throughout their entire lives. 5 stars from me. Grab this backlist gem if you have not read it already. It's The Light Pirate by Lily Brooks Dalton.
You just made me re-fall in love with that book.
Have you read it?
Yeah, I loved it too.
I thought so. I'm seeing you're like, yep, nodding and like, oh.
Well, you did such a good job talking about it. And yeah, again, you just made me re-fall in love with it. And
it's incredible. It's so good.
So good.
It's so good. I don't know what else to say. I love Lily Brooks Dalton. She's now an auto-read author. I brought one of her other books to the show earlier this year, Good Morning Midnight. It's just as good. It's very similar in a lot of ways, but I think The Light Pirate is singular. I mean, it's a book that I will remember for a very long time. And I can't wait to read more by her. So I'm glad you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I really liked about this one too is when hard things happen in this book, they happen fast to where you almost have to go back and you're like, wait, what just happened? But I love that because that's what happens in real life. Like, the hard things just happen and like you don't get a chance to emotionally react. And that happened in several different points where big things happened in the book, right? And you're like, wait a minute, wait, what? No, I don't, I need, and you're basically having to like recover from that with the character. And
oh my God, that's so smart. Yeah.
It was so smart.
No, you're smart for calling that out, and the book is smart.
The book is smart.
both are smart. But yeah, you're absolutely right because that happened to me several times, and I actually quite like that. I don't know that I ever would have identified it, but I like when that happens because you're right. It's real life. Like things change in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and you have to just keep going.
Yeah. Oh, what a good story.
Chills. Fabulous. Well, what do we have to wrap things up? Do you have a shelf edition for us today?
I do have a shelf edition, and I have a shelf edition. As one does, I'm going through tons of lists to try and find books to add and, to try and find books to try. I was just working on my script this morning and I thought, oh goodness, I should have brought this one. It's called The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. And I'm not exactly sure if it's climate fiction. I think it might be more post-apocalyptic, but I love this author. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know he had written a book sort of in this vein. It is about someone named Hig who has somehow survived the flu pandemic that killed everyone he knows. Now, his wife is gone, his friends are dead, and he lives in the hangar of a small abandoned airport with his dog Jasper and a mercurial, gun-toting misanthrope named Bangley. When a random transmission beams through the radio of his 1956 Cessna, the voice ignites a deep hope inside of him that better life exists outside of their tightly controlled perimeter. Risking everything, he flies past his point of no return and follows its static, broken trail, only to find something that is better and worse than anything he could have hoped for. So I really enjoy Peter Heller's writing. I like books about pandemics. I think I'll enjoy this. And it actually somewhat reminds me of Good Morning Midnight by Lily Brooks Dalton, because that also has this thing where characters are connecting via radio, and it's like they're the only couple people left on the earth and they're not able to visit each other, but they're still somehow connecting. So I think this sounds interesting. It is The Dog Stars by Peter Heller.
Yeah, you have convinced me to try Peter Heller again.
I guess I'm like a Peter Heller fan girl at this moment because I've mentioned him a couple times recently, but I think he's worth it.
Yeah, but that's great. Finding an author that, especially one that has a backlist or more books that you can read, it's great to find someone that you can keep reading from.
Exactly. Now, you had me go twice in a row. I want to hear from you. What's your shelf edition?
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to keep things spicy.
You did great.
Keep you on your toes. So I'm bringing an audiobook that I recently downloaded. It is also a new release. This one came out on June 3rd, and that is Ambition Monster by Jennifer Romolini. Have you heard of this one?
Yes, I know exactly the book you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this also has, I'm going to circle back to our cover love episode where we talked about those contrasting colors on covers, and Ambition Monster does that with this kind of emerald green cover and then bubblegum pink font, and which are two colors that you just would not think go well together, but I really like the cover of this one. So this is a memoir about workaholism and the addictive nature of ambition and the humbling process of picking yourself up when the world lets you down. This is a anti-girl boss book for our times for readers of Drinking, A Love Story, and Uncanny Valley. Those were two comps that the synopsis gave us. I haven't read either of those two books, but I do love an anti-girl boss book. So this is written with self-deprecation and wit. It is a gusty and powerful look at workaholism and the addictive nature of achievement, the lingering effect of childhood trauma, and the failures of our modern rat race. This is a Cinderella story of success and a brutal appraisal of the cost of capitalism, perfect for people pleasers, overachievers, and those whose traumas have driven them to strike for goodness, no matter what the cost. With its timely and resonant deconstructing of the American dream, Ambition Monster is a singular excavation of selfhood, an essential interrogation about the way we work, and an inspiring and affirming call to always bet on yourself. That sounds so good to me. And I recently had a friend say that they could not stop listening. And I love having an audiobook like that, let alone a memoir. I'm very excited to listen to this one. That is Ambition Monster by Jennifer Romolini.
That's a great call out. I've seen the cover too. And now, ever since we recorded that Cover Love episode, I'm looking at covers everywhere. I'm like, oh, do these colors go together? Is this what we were talking about? Like, I'm seeing it more in font. But yeah, it is sort of fun once you know to look at those trends. I'm like, ooh, where can I find them? That's it for today. We thank you for spending a part of your day with us. Links to all the books mentioned can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can help us by following us wherever you listen and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us get our show out to new listeners and grows our audience. And don't forget, if you would like access to exclusive bonus content and community, you can join us for $5 a month on patreon.com/booktalk, etc.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at booktalk.etc@gmail.com. You can also connect with us both at Booktalk Etc. on Instagram and Tina at TBR Etc. and Hannah at Handpicked Books. Talk to you next week. In the meantime, remember,
everything's better with books. Hey, breaking news. Did you know that Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman are returning for a Practical Magic sequel?
Yeah.
I just saw this. Very exciting. When's it coming out, though?
I don't know. But I have breaking news. I have breaking news for you.
What?
I've never seen Practical Magic 1. No, I've never seen it. I know.
You know, I've only read it.
Oh, you're like, oh, me neither.
I only read it. But okay, so now I think I have to do that. I have to watch it this fall. But I've read... and the funny part is too, I've only read it, but of course, as it's a series, I've only read the first 2 books because Lord knows I can't keep up.
Well, maybe we can do a Patreon watch party.